It's been 2 weeks since Kamala Harris has become the presumptive nominee. And today, markets are reacting directly to Kamala Harris. You see, markets are as much psychological as they are data-driven. When people lose confidence, a bloodbath ensues. Over the weekend, something very noticeable happened. Kamala Harris took the lead in all of the betting markets. Kamala Harris looked as if she's now the favorite in this race. And these things go up and they go down. And I've told you guys not to panic. And since America is likely, according to the betting markets, to put an incompetent California communist as president of the United States, 2 weeks later, the sentiment around the lack of American leadership, the lack of American strength, and the lack of American economic power was proven today to be very dramatic. The NASDAQ has never in its history been down 1,000 points, ever, even temporarily, until today. Earlier this morning, the NASDAQ hit that threshold temporarily. Now, today, of course, is 2 weeks, as we have mentioned, after Kamala Harris became the presumptive nominee. All around the world, the economy is on the brink. The top Japanese stock market index fell 12% today. In Korea, their market is down more than 8%. Markets in Europe are all down big. And here in America, the Dow, the NASDAQ, and the S&P have all dipped about 2%. Trillions of dollars of value. Poof. Lost. Eradicated. I encourage all of you, do not look at your stock portfolio today. Do not look at your 401k. That is all brought to you by Kamala Harris. Now, before I continue on the data surrounding this, it's very important. If you watch the Kamala Harris advertisements, if you look at how they're presenting her, they act as if she's an outsider trying to become president. She is the current vice president of this country, and you do not have a president. So for all intents and purposes, she is in charge. She is in charge for this looming Middle East war. She is in charge of this market collapse. Let's put cut 6 up on screen. This is her doing. Your 401k, your stock portfolio, your life savings, the money that you have tucked aside for your kid or your grandkid. We did it, Joe, as Kamala Harris would say. And this is just the beginning. This is the beginning of a market correction, which only could be called the Kamala crash. In addition to a bad jobs report, we have yet another revision of prior jobs report to be even lower. That happened almost every month for the past 8 months or so. Is Biden and his regime systematically exaggerating its job reports, just like they systematically downplayed inflation in 2021? The start of this contagion appears to be the jobs report last week. People started to say, oh, maybe this economy is not what they say it is. And it's never been a strong economy. We've been saying this for the last 2 years. For anyone that will listen, that this economy is built on a sugar high, just like Kamala Harris, of cheap money, of cheap liquidity that has been infused into the system to artificially try and boost demand. Well, right around when the bad jobs report hit, Intel announced that they are cutting 15,000 jobs. Suddenly, tech is crashing, and the AI bubble might be bursting. Just to think, if this is a real financial crisis, what tools do we have to deal with it? 15 years ago, we simply borrowed our way out of a global financial crisis, and tens of millions of people still have never recovered from it. We spent our way out of COVID too. Something on this program, we were against every single bailout package going back to 2020. We were one of the only broadcasts that were against every single bailout package. Almost every other conservative pundit said, oh, we need to borrow this money. It was never necessary. The only thing that should have been necessary was open the economy. Open the economy, and that is your stimulus. But now we have almost 4 times the national debt that we had in 2008. We have deficit of $2 trillion a year with what they tell us is a good economy. The U.S. dollar is collapsing around the world. The Middle East is ditching the petrodollar, and aligning more towards China. Biden's sanctions on Russia are making lots of countries, even some of our supposed allies, look for alternatives to the dollar. If the U.S. dollar loses its dominance, we can't offload our debt onto the entire planet. Today, it's just a market crash. Today, many of you are significantly poorer than you were last night. But we are on the precipice of something far, far worse. And it's all a byproduct of Kamala Harris and her regime. We should no longer mention Joe Biden. Do you see what Joe Biden did last week at the hostage thing? It's very telling. Two parts of it. Number one, Joe Biden literally went on the plane the hostage came off of as if they're boarding the plane. Number two, Kamala Harris didn't stop him. Just leading the lamb to slaughter. This is all a byproduct of Kamala Harris mismanaging the economy to the brink of total disaster. If we are to give Kamala Harris 4 more years of this, we will enter an economic nightmare, an economic nuclear catastrophe. This is nature warning you. This is nature saying, okay, you might be all pumped up on Kamala-mentum. Playtime is over, everybody. And for all of you that have Democrats in your local life or Democrat neighbors, it's time for you to be awfully forceful about this. The NASDAQ has never had a day as bad as it's had. Now, America, we are a much weaker country than we were 15 years ago, thanks to our oligarchs and our plutocrats. The only reprieve we had was Donald Trump for 4 years. Our middle class is weaker. Our debt is greater. Our elites are even more incompetent. And by the way, we've mentioned this previously, slightly, but a war might break out in the Middle East, which would drive oil prices through the roof. As bad as it is here, it is even worse in Japan. Japan is going into something close to a Great Depression. And Japan, by the way, is a warning sign for America. Japan, by far, has the highest debt to GDP ratio of any modern country. They have a 350% debt to GDP ratio. Modern monetary theory and quantitative easing has been going on in Japan since the early 1990s. They have refused to cut spending, refused to get their fiscal house in order, and Japan is now collapsing, as we are now collapsing. Is Kamala Harris going to do a press conference today? Is anyone going to do a press conference today? Do you know that Biden's chief White House economic advisor resigned today? Just resigned. And if Kamala Harris is to become president of the United States for 4 more years, everything that you have worked your life towards could disappear in an instant. This is going to get worse before it gets better. This is just the beginning of the bad economic news. By the way, tech is usually on the front end. So big tech, Intel slashing 15,000 jobs. Amazon stock is down nearly 20%. It's because our current economic model is built on a cheap money house of cards. We have turned the money printer on and we flooded the system. We are borrowing $2 trillion a year this last couple of years when we're not in an economic crisis. We're not in an economic good situation, but we certainly were not in an economic crisis. Now we're in an economic crisis. We're now supposed to go borrow $3 trillion. We grew addicted to the relentless stream of deficit spending and cheap money because our leaders in Washington, D.C., specifically Kamala Harris and her entire Leviathan, were uninterested in cutting spending. Interest payments on the national debt are already equal to defense spending. Think about how disastrous that is. And this program, since we started 12 years ago with Turning Point USA, we've been warning about the debt and warning about the debt, but leaders in Washington, D.C. couldn't care less about the national debt. To give you an idea of how enormous our problem is, we could disband the entire U.S. military and we are still in the hole. This economic crisis is a national security issue. Over $1 trillion a year in interest payments alone. And the current kleptocrats of Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer and Kamala Harris and Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren and Cory Booker, they could not care less about the damage that's being done to the country. If Kamala Harris becomes president, she will put forward the greatest tax increase in American history. As vice president right now, she has said, we are going to ban all fracking. She wants to give amnesty to all illegals. The border has been completely wide open. This is by far the most radical person to ever become vice president of the United States. And for all intents and purposes, she is overseeing this market collapse. As I host right now, the Dow is down 2.1%, 837 points. And the media is trying their best to ignore this, but guess what? People's 401k and people's money, it overcomes any censorship opportunities or censorship attempts by the regime. Right now, I'm looking right now, NBC News. Trump ditches upcoming ABC debate. That's the headline right now of NBC News. Breaking news. Now, I'd say the breaking news is probably the fact that people's 401k is worth significantly less. The economic agenda of the Biden-Harris presidency, more importantly, the Harris-Biden presidency, has been very simple. Print money into oblivion. And I think the Venn diagram is best to describe this. Let's put this up on screen. So she likes Venn diagrams. Let's just see this, okay? Kamala on the left plus economy. Oh, Kamala crash. Got it. Kamala, economy, Kamala crash. I've been speaking to money managers throughout the last week, and they've been warning about this coming. They're saying the lack of economic confidence is profound. There is no widespread agreement that the current trajectory is going to be positive. Warren Buffett sold half of his Apple stock. They know that Kamala Harris will drive this country into the gutter. Recent polling shows that just on the economy, Donald Trump has a 31-point advantage on the issue of the economy in Michigan, 31-point advantage on the issue of the economy in Pennsylvania, 38-point advantage on the issue of the economy in Wisconsin. So the Fed is going to try to come in and bail out Kamala Harris, Jerome Powell. But the Fed is in a really tough spot. If the Fed would have acted last week, they could have maybe calmed some of this down. But if the Fed comes in now and just they lower basis points by 0.25, they go down by 0.25 basis points, the market is not going to respond kindly. Even if they go down by a half of a point, the market wants something dramatic right now, and I don't think they're going to get it from the Fed because inflation is not transitory. Inflation is as hot as a pistol. And by the way, the Fed should be in full retreat right now. We do have real inflation. Cutting interest rates is the wrong move right now. And it would be a purely political move to try and bail out Kamala Harris.